Welcome to Basement Tales with Sam Jackman, Charlie Einsman, Ed Grass, and Sandra Delancey. We have fun telling crazy but true stories about turning the worst possible property disasters into bags of money. Along the way, we'll pass along some important lessons to help you make cash on real estate. Sam and Charlie walked away from cubicle hell 25 years ago. Starting with no property, they created their own clear sky group of companies, sold hundreds of houses, bought dozens of rentals, and made millions in hard money loans. I'm Ed, a big firm litigator until muscular dystrophy made me find a hobby other than suing people. I miss it. Sandra's the normal person here with a real job plus some rentals. Her decades of friendship with the group, from office flunkies to property gurus, might help keep us all humble and focused on learning something. I wouldn't count on it.
Right. So do we have a topic this week?
I hope so.
So we Charlie and I have had a couple of interesting calls about people who were interested. We've been shopping for loans to buy into our portfolio that might be distressed that we could get at a discount. And so we've gotten connected to a few different people in different parts of the country and locally. And we just got off the phone with a guy who's out of New York, New Jersey, and other places north. They have no less than like 30 months in a foreclosure cycle to foreclose, and if they have to foreclose. So he says 30 months. So and then in New York it's up to five years to foreclose. That's not even possession.
Is that pre-COVID, you mean, or
yes, pre-COVID?
Right. So
you cannot get more than a 60% recovery of an asset under any conditions. It just never works out, and they're under this enormous price pressure to have lower rates because they have a lot of Wall Street money, especially locally there. Mm-hmm. And the rates are like 9 and 1 for loans that take 5 years to recover in foreclosure.
Wow.
And they're using a lot of their own capital for that.
What sort of LTV are they? So this is a hard money lender. What kind of LTV are they demanding?
Could you make an assessment of that, Charlie? Could you figure out what he's talking about?
He's going out at 60 to 65% loan to value of the after repair value. And he says that anything he lends out over 60%, dollar for dollar, he loses money. They can only collect up to 60%. It's terrible. Mm-hmm. So probably should bring us into our topic. And this is where Ed comes in. What's the difference between a judicial foreclosure state and a normal one like Virginia?
Oh, geez. You're going to ask me to know something about the law?
Yeah.
I thought this was a podcast. We could just make it up. Okay. Well, and I guess to be clear, there's probably three. There's sort of like mixed stuff. But Virginia is an example of a private foreclosure process. Everything is noticed privately and goes through, there's certain legal and regulatory requirements, but you don't have to see a court as an owner to foreclose, or a lender to foreclose on a property. And in the judicial foreclosure states, you basically have to file a suit. It's maybe a specialized suit. It may be fairly separate process from a normal suit, but you have to file a suit, go to court. And then I would say, and nobody really says it this way, so maybe I'm full of it, there's sort of a mixed where there's sort of court supervision at certain points in the process, but at other points it's a private process where you don't have to go to the court. And I guess Maryland, I feel, is a little bit like that. And this is a good time to the standard disclaimer to our audience. I am a lawyer, but I am not your lawyer. So if you have any questions about these things, we're talking about general principles, so you can learn about real estate and the things to look for. And I'll let Charlie pick up again. But the main reason is sort of what we started on, is different procedures create different timelines and reality for foreclosing. And then on top of that, if there's anybody there, a past owner, a tenant, a squatter, there's a process to get them out. So you need to know your jurisdiction. You certainly can hire a lawyer to talk about it, there's good resources on the web that'll outline things, but as Sam and Charlie are getting to, there's quite a variety of the timeline. Um, so Virginia is the quickest, and these guys have a lot of experience. They can talk about the timeline, but you can do a foreclosure pretty fast normally, subject to maybe a bankruptcy or something disrupting it a bit, and then you can evict pretty quickly. In theory, you can foreclose in DC, I guess, fairly quickly. I don't have as much knowledge about that, but even pre-COVID, it's very hard to actually evict somebody, particularly if they're a holdover tenant or they claim to be a holdover tenant. Anyway, probably more than you wanted, Charlie, but that's the
Yeah.
broad
And
outline.
so our experience with DC is twofold, right? I think this is one of these jurisdictions where it's a quasi jurisdiction, because as long as you have a commercial loan, and this is even pre-COVID, post-COVID, and there's no personal guarantees, there is no judicial process to foreclose.
It's fast.
It's pretty fast. It's very
Right.
similar to Virginia. But if you do have personal guarantee in DC, then there is a judicial component of the foreclosure. And so some of our hard money competitors, we're pretty sure, make the mistake of accepting personal guarantees.
Yep.
Huh?
Yeah,
What'd you say?
we absolutely know that to be the case.
Yeah, and so they make the mistake and they get a personal guarantee, even though it's a commercial loan, and they have to go through the judicial process within DC. And so, like you said earlier, DC is one of those quasi type of jurisdictions that have both a judicial portion of the foreclosure and a non-judicial. And we just make sure our commercial loans follow the non-judicial cycle so that it's much quicker. Maryland, you just can't get away with it. It's judicial all the way. You go to sale, the courthouse steps, the sale is technically ratified, but then the ratification of the sale has to go through that judicial process for the court to put their layer of approval on it. And that sort of makes it a little bit longer. It's certainly not like New York and New Jersey, but pre-COVID, at least for Maryland, it was more of a, depending upon which county you're in, but it was a 3 to 4 month cycle. But post-COVID, it's going anywhere from 6 months to 9 months. But like you said earlier, Ed, it's jurisdiction specific, and you've got to know the laws of your particular state or jurisdiction.
Yeah, and you should be. There's a lot of good real estate attorneys out there. There's a lot of not good real estate attorneys out there. But if they do a decent number of these, they should know and be able to give you a timeline. They're not going to give you a promise, but they're going to give you some concept. And probably most of our listeners are, going to be buying properties to flip them, and maybe buying something out of a foreclosure, and so, or maybe buying and then renting. And so you may not be as concerned about the foreclosure process as the eviction. They're really two different things. The to foreclose on a loan, that sort of just starts the ball. If the property's vacant, well, that's easy. You get possession. But if somebody claims that they have a right to stay there, and there's any number of ways they can do that, or renters, then you have issues. And DC, for example, has a lot of well-meaning tenant protections, and unfortunately, there's a whole bar or a whole group of attorneys whose practice is basically to manipulate and abuse that. Of course, the landlords, bad landlords, not like Sam and Charlie, can manipulate the process on
And
the other side.
Sandra also a landlord.
Yeah.
Oh no, Sandra's a good landlord. I'm not worried about her.
No, Sandra's a good landlord unless they're on the bingo list.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Not many people get on that list, Charlie. So
Yeah.
Well, I think the other thing that needs to be apparent, especially to the listeners out there, is that even though you have a judicial versus a non-judicial foreclosure process on the back end, the front end is basically the same, right? So the first thing you got to do when you're foreclosing on somebody is, send them out the notice of default, right? And then you've got to advertise them in the paper. And then all auctions, whether it's a trustee sale or whether it's a sheriff sale or whether it's another type of sale, they have to be publicly advertised. And the sale themselves have to be a public sale. So all those things are very similar in all types of different states and jurisdictions on the beginning part of that foreclosure, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, Virginia is fairly simple. And Maryland just seems to be, I've, seen and followed along with a few of them. I've not done one myself, but boy, there's a lot of, statutes you got to cite. And even for some of this stuff, the DC, I know this is the case. You have to have notices sent out with certain fonts. You have to have, I think, notices sent in both English and Spanish. And DC makes some of those forms available and the information. And like I say, there's a bunch on the internet. What do you think, guys, if somebody here gets their first property and they're renting it out, what sort of cost to hire your standard competent attorney to actually perform an eviction, say in Virginia or Maryland or DC?
I think eviction in Virginia be, I would think $2,500 or less. You could maybe do it a little less than that, and probably I would say triple that in DC and Maryland.
Hmm. Right.
I think it also is going to depend on, is it a contested eviction?
Oh yeah.
If it's a contested eviction, those numbers go much higher.
Oh yeah. Well, one of the things that's interesting why we bring up the foreclosure process for our borrowers and other people to know is that really drives our interest in lending in those areas, right? And how much we want to collect in rate, how much percentage we'll give of a loan. That if we can't collect, like if you're in New York and it takes you 5 years to collect on your loan, you're speculating on a market 5 years from now and the property in unknown condition. That makes me very uninterested in lending to people that aren't really actually creditworthy individuals. If you're lending in Virginia and I can grab that property back pretty quick and have some degree of control of the asset in 6 months, 9 months, not have it all waterlogged, then I'm inclined, I can say, okay, well, I can see the market 9 months from now. I can see getting possession of it. There's a reasonable process. But the odd thing about it is that our rates here in Virginia are much higher than the ones that they're getting in New York because there's so much price competition from uh, from large institutional organizations that are trying to soak up product that's close to them on Wall Street, and so it makes the cost of money really low for the consumer. So the consumer gets a huge benefit, and the person who's in our role is about ready to pull their hair out. Like the guy we talked to he was quite an affluent guy, had worked at Morgan Stanley or whatever. He did not sound like he was enjoying his line of work. He just kept talking about how all the hedge funds are wrecking his business and how he's put all this energy into it. And he's got 20 employees to carry and these super thin margins. And I was just doing some back of the envelope math on how that looked. And I think that looks like it's better just to go get a job. It's much better to work for him than to be him. There's no question about that.
Well, he could probably send his money to you guys to make hard money loans and make better
He could.
margins as
Good.
a funder of
Yeah, and
other.
I think he'd probably like to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well,
just a question now. So I'm sitting here as the average, real estate investor. Again, from the people here, coming from the people. So you don't typically think of a real estate investor as being a person who would, foreclose on a loan, right? So I'm
No,
thinking
no.
a traditional
That's why I was
foreclosure.
trying to draw it into like, why
Yeah.
does this matter to you as an investor?
Why does this matter to me? Because and to you guys, because I don't think of you typically as like, a person who owns someone's home who would want to foreclose. So can you talk about that? So, I mean, how do you take over ownership of someone's home when you just loan them hard money to fix up a house or, flip a house?
Back to like how the process works from the start,
Yes,
not just sort of
yes.
the esoteric, nature of it.
Right, right.
Yeah. Well, let's just start how this usually unfolds, right? So if a person has gotten a loan from us and then they stop communicating with us, usually the next thing that we're going to have is no payment. And then that goes on. We send them a letter, we send them an email, I give them a call, I text them, they don't respond. And then we get a little further down, 2 months down, and then we're like, look, these guys, they won't even wake up. They won't even respond to us. So we say, okay, next thing you do, we get counsel. We send them a copy of the entire closed loan package that we have. And we say, look, this guy's not responding. This is how much they owe us. And can you start the foreclosure process? Now, that's very curative, right? Like you send that to the lawyer, he charges us a couple grand to look through some papers and send out a letter, and we end up charging the borrower back for that expense. But that borrower wakes up, that they are going to be awake when they get the lawyer, when the sheriff comes with a letter or whoever serves them, process server. So then you start a dialogue, and sometimes you get a payoff then, resolve it. Like half the time it will become, something that people will say, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't call you, I really couldn't cope with it. And they'll just do a workout situation, and there's no hard feelings. It's all good. Then there's the people who just won't pay, and then the foreclosure has to be advertised and brought to an auction. And as a person who came to one of our auctions and ended up buying that asset after we took it back, you saw the whole process there. We set up outside, then the auction's called, we give them a start price, people bid, and if they bid enough, they get it, and if they don't, we take it back. And then that whole judicial component of it is in there that Charlie and Ed were talking about earlier.
But that was a case where you actually gave them money to own the homes. Well, what happens if you just loan them hard money and then there's still a lender who, that they owe as well?
Oh, I see. As we're in the second position.
You're in the second position. It works differently if you're in the second position?
Yeah, it totally works differently in the second position, because in the second position, we would have to make sure that first is current. So we would have to start making payments on the first. Then we could foreclose on our second position, just to make sure that they don't go into default on the first and more fees get run up on the first. And so we would have to go ahead and do that. But if we were going to do a second trust, though, there has to be a lot of room of equity in that property for us to even do the second. And so we would never do that. But getting back to your first question, probably in all of our cases where we've had to foreclose on somebody, it's all these borrowers have met the same criteria. We've probably given them too many loans, and we have maybe on accident overextended themselves. And so all the cases where we've really foreclosed, it's been to a borrower that's had 4 or 5 properties, and they're using a certain amount of our draw schedule money for the renovation to apply to other projects. Because usually one-off and beginning investors come to us with a property that's worth, I don't know, 400,000. They're buying it for 250. They have a $50,000 renovation budget, so they're all in at 300. At that point, all they have to do is execute on that one particular deal. Well, in the case that we usually have to foreclose, it's usually a multiple property offender. And so that's usually the bulk of our foreclosures. I mean, we do have some one-offs every now and then, but it's not that many. It doesn't happen very often.
What do you think the cause is often? I mean, obviously people can have personal problems and drug problems and divorce problems, but in hearing and talking to you guys, I don't know. I mean, one, it's striking that you send a letter and it's to some people are like, oh, oops, I owe you, $6,000. I just didn't get to it, which I know you guys have had that, which is kind of amazing to me that you wouldn't be at least be concerned about that. But then, what is it? Like you say, do they get over their skis with too much going on?
Yeah, exactly. Then they use money from one project to another. They leave vendors unpaid, and they become overextended. And then they become stuck. They become overwhelmed with it, and then they just quit. They just quit, and then the taxes pile up, and the houses get wet with water or whatever, and then they're just like completely done.
Right.
Check out.
Yeah, they just check out. And the other big problem with us is that on the foreclosure front that we have to do, and we're doing a better job today, is that let's say for example, if somebody's in Leesburg, Virginia, which for you those out there don't know where Leesburg is, it's about 45 miles west of DC. So if you're in Leesburg, Virginia, and you've got a couple loans on properties in Baltimore, Maryland, which Baltimore is about 60 miles north of DC, that's probably not a good borrower to lend money to. Because if you're having to drive from Leesburg to Baltimore, which is 150 miles round trip, that person has got to be really, really committed to the project, because if a couple things go wrong, let's say some Baltimore contractors, then they're more likely to throw up their hands and quit. So believe it or not, an important part of us evaluating deals has to understand where that person who's executing on the project, number one, lives. Obviously, we know where the property is located. And so if there's a lot of miles between the property and where they live, we now might turn that loan down, especially if this is their first project or two. They've got to be fairly close to where the project is located, or else we might not lend the money.
Right, because you ultimately you're going to make more money if they're successful, both on
Yeah.
that deal and having them come back. And you don't want to, get in the middle of something that you're going to have all those expenses and stress and everything else, and they're not going to be happy, obviously, if you have to foreclose. But you guys don't typically or at all even get a credit report or an application or anything. You're going pretty much on the property. But I imagine, I know, Charlie, you talk to your people a lot. I guess you get to know them, and how do you evaluate that sort of thing? And I guess the other thing that's for the people out there, there are a lot of hard money lenders who do get credit reports and do applications. It's just a lot simpler than a regular bank loan, but they might even require a certain credit number. So,
Sure.
how do you guys deal with that? Why do you do it the way you do, and others do it differently?
Well, there's a two-pronged approach. Number one is the exit strategy. So if the exit strategy is a buy and rent it out and refinance it, we're very concerned about the credit because we need to make sure that they're going to be able to refinance us out. So the next kind of exit strategy that we deal with is, and this is probably 85% of our business, is fix and flips. And so the first thing that we do, obviously, we evaluate the after repair value of the asset, right? So that deal has got to have a lot of equity room in there for us to even look at it. And the next thing that we look at is loan to cost. So we'll go at it at 90% or a 95% loan to cost. Now, loan to cost is the renovation amount of money plus the purchase price. So we'll make them put, a decent amount of money down. And so with those two things, as long as they're putting, I don't know, 10% of the deal in, let's say it's a $200,000 purchase, a $50,000 renovation, your loan to cost is $250,000. So we're going to make you put down $25,000 into the deal. So by putting in 25,000 and you're getting a good deal on the loan to value of the after repair value side, we just don't see any use of a credit report because you do have skin in the game. You have gotten a really, really good deal. So whether your credit score is good or bad, in our eyes, 98, 99% of the time, you're going to execute on that project. So the next thing that we care about is the contractor. So as long as the contractor lines up, as long as your skin in the game lines up, and as long as the deal itself lines up, we're all in. And so your credit score really doesn't matter. What matters is your execution ability, more so than the bad credit score. So that's kind of the way we approach it.
Because I would imagine some people who maybe they've got an initial lead on a property, that's not necessarily the same thing as having a good credit score. They might find a property that they think they got a good contract price, but they can't get regular financing, which is why they come to you, I guess. But yet, a lot of the hard money lenders do applications, and is there a downside to doing that?
It limits the market, for you. So a lot of these guys who are struggling to find business, they're looking for credit boxes that they can check and say, okay, they've got a certain amount of credit. They'll give them a lower rate and then they'll sell that loan off, but they're not actually behind the asset like we are and really understand it, taking time to know that. So we're really at the core of hard money lending is our approach, as opposed to the mortgage brokering or something like this. It's a little bit different.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like, again, for people out there that are looking for, their first hard money loan as a borrower, that they need to check the market out. I guess the supply and demand down here, there's not a lot of supply. There's not a lot of you guys lending the money, and there's a lot of demand, but it sounds like there's an oversupply, say up in New York with the individual you were talking with. So
Yeah, certainly.
you definitely need to do some research.
So Sandra, how are things going with your rental property? We haven't heard too much on it lately.
Yeah, yeah. So we
That sounds like a summary right there.
Yeah, it's going. So we kind of had an open house, a COVID-friendly open house where we were there for 2 hours and 30-minute blocks we scheduled people to come through and see the place. And
Okay.
we got pretty good, great feedback. The place is, almost brand new. I mean, it has the same bones as, a house that was built in, I think it was the 40s maybe. But the interior is all new. So it looks great. The feedback was very positive. Like I said, it's probably because of the location. It may go to, a Section 8, demographic, which is fine with us because I'm sure the payments from the government will be great. The only thing is we're kind of in a little niche area in DC where all around, that neighborhood, it demands a little, at least $300, $300 to $400 more per month from the DC, I guess it's Housing and Community Development, DHA, Housing Department, for Section 8. So I don't know. We'll have to deal with, that possibly lowering the rent. So that's the only thing. But we got some pretty good candidates coming through there. A nice family that's looking to move back to the neighborhood that they grew up in, and they know it well, and they know the people that live there, and they kind of know, how to navigate, that part of DC. So it was pretty positive. We're
Yeah,
looking
that's
forward to
a
renting
good
it.
thing to point out too, as you're alluded to, is the Section 8 rules and some of the localities rules. They sort of set the rent that you can get in certain types of properties, and some of that's not knowable till you actually get in there and they tell you what that is. I guess it,
Hmm.
and I'm no expert on this. I guess it varies by the size of the family even and the number of rooms. I'm not sure how it all comes down.
Hmm.
But that can be a big difference. And same with a private renter, can be very sensitive on the price. they
Right.
they
Well,
just have to get in there at a certain number.
yeah, the rent is set by, DC government, what they will pay for that property, and it depends on the neighborhood that it's in. So
Mm,
this little neighborhood, it may only be about 20 square blocks. It's a small neighborhood, but it is getting, I guess the amount that the DC government has deemed as, that they'll pay for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house is probably, like I said, $300 to $400 less than the surrounding neighborhoods. And then they also look at the median income of, the area to see how much that purchase, I guess, particular person or family would qualify for. And that's what they will pay. And then the person would have to make up the difference. So
right.
that's what we're learning. We're trying to get someone, of course, that will, qualify for 100% DC government payment would be ideal.
Yeah.
So that's what we're looking for.
Right.
The lady who wanted to run the what is it, the nail salon, nail shop, she didn't come by.
Oh, okay.
So I didn't want her to come over anyway. So
How does do you think if you know what the likely Section 8 authorized rent is, how is it looking in comparison, say, to a private renter? Do you think it's comparable, or it'll be fairly close, or what you can get on the totally open market, or is it big difference, or what's up with that?
for this neighborhood, I think it's lower. And
Right.
I brought that up to the family that was really interested that we kind of, would like to move into the house. They said that they realize it as well. So they are going to try to work with their caseworker. We'll see. I don't know if there's
Yeah.
a process that they
We had
can
the
kind of.
same thing at Irving,
Mhm.
another neighborhood in Northeast, and it was below the market.
Because the idea is the Section 8 number is supposed to be reflective of the open market. Is it not, or how does that work?
Maybe they're not as dynamic in changing their payment structure, as the market's gone up for
Mhm,
rentals.
mhm.
And you got the egress window taken care of, right? So you're a full 3 bedroom, so that's nice.
Charlie Grass, can you take that out, please?
That's our sound engineer.
Sound
Yeah.
engineer, can you remove that, please?
Yeah, delete any reference. This is an actual comment. Delete any
To an
reference.
egress window being put into this house. Can you
Yeah,
remove that, please?
yeah, yeah.
But no, I skipped over that, Ed.
Yeah.
She got rid of the stink water. The water was stinky there from the
Yeah.
water heater.
The window is great. It's huge. And actually the person who came in, so we can start pick it up now. There's a great, basement window that's an egress window in the place. And the actual the person who is looking to, move in, and that they love the place. And they said that window is so big, can we put bars on it? And I said, no, we cannot put bars on that window because we won't be able to get our business license if we try to rent that out as a bedroom, and you can't open the window. So we don't want to put bars on the window. So no.
Interesting.
But no, it's going very well.
So we've had basement windows, just for the audience's knowledge, that you can open from the inside with bars, but you have to have a special push open bar system. So you put the bars on the windows. Actually, that was one of our first houses we were dealing with, Charlie. We did that in Southeast.
So we put a bar system in there?
Yeah, you put the
How'd that
bars
work?
on. Well, it didn't work well because I didn't know that that you were supposed to have the push release. So I had bars put on the window, and then we got the inspection.
Yeah.
They're like, these aren't rooms that you can use, and you can't just leave them dangerous like that. So we had to call the guy back and have a release system put on it. And so they put like a rod that goes into the house. You push the rod, it releases a latch, and the bar's open. But you push it from the inside of the house.
I'm
So
just
like
not looking to put any more money into
I
this
got you.
at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's we call this TTC,
What's that?
time to collect.
So funny thing is, one guy came from,
Time to collect. Yep.
different part of town, and he thought the price was great. He's like, I'm renting a 2-bedroom apartment, on the other side
Okay.
of the town for the same price. I would love to, move in here. I have a daughter. He comes in, the first thing he wants to do is, let me tell you my story.
Oh,
And I
boy.
said, well, we don't want to hear your story. I said,
Oh,
you want to
oh,
walk
boy.
around the house? And then my arms were folded like this. I'm like, maybe you want to just walk around the house first. So I did an ad on him.
I've got
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Did you ever hear the story?
What story?
This guy's story.
No, I did not hear the story. I didn't
Oh,
want to hear the story.
This is Basement Tales. You need to hear
There
the
was no
story.
story. He came from the other side of town. Yes. Okay. But no, he's like, I own a limousine company, blah, blah. I'm like, no, I said, just go and see if you like the house, fill out an application, we'll call you. So that was it. But he says, he's renting up a place, on the other side of town, 2 bedrooms for, a little bit more than the cost to rent this whole house, a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. He loved it. And, he needs a place because he has a daughter, and he wants the daughter to run around in the backyard. And I'm like,
You got part of the story.
there are 2 big Rottweilers in that backyard back there. And the next door neighbor has these huge dogs whose heads are like, twice the size of a human head. And Derek calls them ghosts. So my husband calls the dogs ghosts. Ghosts 1 and ghosts 2. They're huge.
Surprised you didn't call them after the Harry Potter dogs.
What are they?
On one of those movies at the beginning where you had the big dogs behind that big door.
Well,
They had big heads.
They're huge. These dogs are
Harry
huge.
Potter
I would not have my children in that backyard with Ghost 1 and Ghost 2.
Certainly not eating a lunch.
Mm.
Child goes back there to eat lunch, their lunch.
So is it a shared backyard, or just like the dog could leap over a fence, or what?
Well, it feels like a shared backyard, but there's a fence. It's fenced in, but this particular our property does not have like access to an alleyway. So our backyard is, just shared with other, backyards. And Ghost 1 and Ghost 2, they live to the left of where we are in the backyard. And their heads must be above the fence. These dogs are huge. The fence is probably about a 3.5 foot tall fence. It's not even like a 4. And they're huge. They seem friendly enough, but
It sounds like a selling feature. I mean, as long as the dogs don't eat one of your renters' children, I mean, that's like added security.
No one's going to be in the backyard.
we should probably just open the fence up and kind of, just join into theirs and allow the dogs free range into our yard. Yeah. No one would come through that back window. We wouldn't have to worry about that. Don't need a security fence or a security gate. That's true. I'll talk to the next door neighbor about that. Borrow Ghost 1 and Ghost 2.
Which is, and it's always important to know your neighbors as well. If you're flipping a house, renting a house,
Oh yeah,
whatever, there definitely can be an early line of defense if there's a problem, or
for sure.
whatever.
Or they could be the problem.
It could be, yes, that's true. Well, at least it's one-stop shopping.
Right. Right.
There must be a story on that.
Oh, we got plenty of neighbor stories.
I would think so. How about dogs? We're getting close to the end here for today, but how about dog attacks? I don't remember either of you, Sam and Charlie, getting bitten on one of your inspections.
No, we've encountered the ghost dogs before, but never been bitten by one.
Yeah.
These dogs were as big as that big white dog that you had like recently. The one that was
Yeah. That she
smiling at you
was-
from the car window.
Yeah.
Yeah.